President Trump is proposing a $4 trillion budget for fiscal year 2019, and he's moving ahead with a $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. Mola Lenghi has more from the White House.
President Trump spoke to a group of state and local lawmakers and told them help with rebuilding their roads and bridges is on the way.
Washington will no longer be a roadblock to progress. Washington will now be your partner. We'll be your partner.
But the president's infrastructure plan will mean many of the lawmakers will have to foot the bill themselves. Of the $1.5 trillion plan, only $200 billion would come from the federal government. The rest would come from state and local spending and private investments.
Nobody knows better than you people where you want the money invested.
In addition to infrastructure, the White House unveiled a budget proposal for 2019 that is heavy on investments and the deficit.
This budget not only funds the president's priorities, but puts the country on a path to restoring fiscal discipline.
The $4 trillion proposal includes $17 billion to fight the opioid epidemic and $23 billion for border security, including the border wall. But conservatives don't want to add another $1 trillion in deficit spending.
It makes even a drunken sailor blush. And the problem with that is the drunken sailor actually spent his own money. We've got the government spending yours.
Democrats aren't likely to sign off either. The plan includes trillions of dollars worth of cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and other social programs.
NPR congressional correspondent Scott Detrow is in Washington. So, Scott, the Senate began an open-ended debate on immigration Monday. How long might this debate go on for?
I think we're looking at a couple weeks at this point. It's interesting. This is the way that most people think the Senate works, but it hardly ever works like this. You hardly ever have a vote where the leaders don't know the outcome. You hardly ever have the debate out in the open. But that's exactly what's going to happen over the next couple weeks. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said, I'm committing to debate. And that's about it. I'm not committing to an outcome. I'm not committing to a specific plan. Whatever can muster 60 votes is what's going to go forward. And that'll certainly be interesting over the next couple of weeks. I think at the beginning, you have the fault lines that have been in place for a while now. Democrats say they're willing to compromise on a narrow proposal. That's what Chuck Schumer was asking for today, something that trades permanent protection for people in DACA for an increase in border security. But you still have the White House insisting on changes to the legal immigration system, getting rid of the visa lottery and clamping down on how family members are examined when they're applying for application, allowing your family members to come as well. This is something that President Trump and others call chain migration. Democrats reject that term.
When it comes to actually the serious proposals, what kinds of proposals are being debated?
I think it's going to start with the four parameters that the White House laid out, those ones I just walked through. Some sort of protection for people in DACA. The White House has expanded it. This was their big, in their minds, their big bipartisan overture, expanding it beyond DACA itself, which is about 700,000 people, to 1.8 million people who are eligible for DACA. Democrats appreciated that, but Democrats view any sort of change to the legal immigration process as something they just have no interest in doing. And right now the White House doesn't seem to be walking down from that. And the other question as well is, if something gets 60 votes in the Senate and is able to pass, is this a repeat of 2013 where you have big bipartisan buy-in in the Senate, then it goes to a very conservative House and just goes nowhere?
Well, also on Monday, President Trump debuted his $4 trillion budget proposal. The plan he released last year promised to work on balancing the budget. So why does this one look so different?
This one does not really balance the budget as well. The last 5 days or so has really given a clear indication that deficits are not something that prioritize Republicans in the way that they did when President Obama was in the White House. You just saw, there was certainly some pushback from the Freedom Caucus, from Tea Party members on the budget measure that passed in the House a couple days ago, increasing $300 billion in spending over the next few years. But by and large, Republican leadership was on board. Most Republican members are on board. And now you have a budget coming out of the White House that does not even pretend to balance the budget or get rid of deficits over the coming years. I think that's a reflection of the tax bill that went into effect at the beginning of the year, and an interest in increasing military spending. And it's interesting to me that so far you're not hearing the anger, you're not hearing the backlash from grassroots Republicans on this increased spending and on these bigger deficits.
Right. That was going to be my question. How are people in his own party reacting to his proposal?
By and large, they're going along with it. One of the storylines of the last few years is how the Republican Party is turning into the party of Trump. And so far we had seen this dual track where in terms of what was being talked about, what sort of issues were being pushed on the campaign trail and on Twitter, you had this very Trumpian nationalistic view. But then when it came to actual policy, it was very traditional Republican policy. But here you have increased spending, both military and domestic, and no attempt to rein in deficits. So the question is, as long as President Trump's on board with it, will Republican voters and lawmakers go along with it? And so far, that seems to be the case, which is certainly an interesting shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, part of that budget is a $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. Only about $200 billion of those dollars would come from the federal government. How does the White House plan on getting state and local investments?
That is something that a lot of Democrats had questions about. You know, President Trump all along has floated, and actually, to be fair, Democrats have as well, floated infrastructure as this one area where there could be some sort of bipartisan compromise. You know, from the first days of his administration, there was always, well, we disagree on X, Y, and Z, but maybe we could do infrastructure. But Democrats are rejecting this plan pretty quickly, saying that this is something that relies on tax breaks, on privatization, on selling off a lot of government assets and privatizing them, which is something that not many Democrats are on board with. You already have Chuck Schumer and other Democrats calling this the Trump toll plan.
All right. We will see how negotiations proceed in this midterm election year. Scott Detrow, thanks so much, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.